They laughed when she boarded in worn jeans and an old hoodie, whispering that she didn't belong in seat 14F. A flight attendant smirked, asking if she was lost. Businessmen snorted. Influencers sneered. No one noticed the faded eagle patch stitched onto her backpack, or the way her eyes scanned the aircraft like muscle memory. But when the F-22s outside paused mid-mission and a colonel stepped aboard with 3 words, "Night Widow report," the smirks vanished. What they didn't know? She once flew through hell to bring an entire squadron home, and now she's back, without warning, without forgiveness. Avery Blake adjusted the strap on her backpack, the faded olive canvas digging slightly into her shoulder as she stepped into the cabin. Her hoodie was soft from wear, its cuffs stretched from years of routine use. Her sneakers bore scuffs that spoke of deserts and tarmacs, not shopping malls. She didn't stand tall, didn't scan the crowd like she owned the place. Instead, she walked with the posture of someone who knew how to disappear when needed. Shoulders low, head neutral, eyes down. "Excuse me, miss," the flight attendant said, blocking her way with a perfectly manicured hand and a saccharine smile. "Boarding for economy is down that way." Candace Morgan's voice carried just enough bite to draw the attention of nearby passengers. Avery offered a small, polite nod and handed over her ticket without a word. Candace's eyes skimmed the stub, then narrowed. "Business class, huh?" she said with an arched brow. Her voice wasn't loud, but the pause she added gave the nearby passengers time to notice. One of them, a man in a navy blazer with a Bluetooth headset, chuckled under his breath. "Must have been a raffle prize," he muttered to his seatmate. Avery said nothing. She had nothing to prove, and no interest in sparring. She simply stepped past Candace and walked down the narrow aisle toward her seat. 14F, a window spot tucked at the rear edge of the business cabin. Savannah Knox, seated across the aisle with a silk scarf looped stylishly around her neck, raised her phone and discreetly snapped a photo of Avery as she stowed her bag. The screen glowed briefly before disappearing into a flurry of fingers and hashtags. Behind Avery, a man in a tailored gray suit, Bradley Thorne, his name tag still clipped from a defense contractor conference, murmured, "She looks like someone who got lost on her way to economy." The woman beside him giggled, hiding her mouth behind a glossy travel magazine. Avery slid into 14F without looking at any of them. She tucked her bag beneath the seat and fastened her belt, her hands steady. Her expression never shifted, but her eyes moved, just enough to take in faces, tone, posture. Nothing obvious, just muscle memory. Candace returned minutes later, handing out warm towels to the first 3 rows. When she reached Avery, she paused, then pivoted sharply, skipping her row without breaking stride. Savannah's phone was up again. The safety video started to play, and Avery leaned back slightly, her fingers brushing the edge of her seat tray. The quiet hum of judgment still lingered around her, coated in the kind of upper-class confidence that doesn't need volume to be venomous. As the plane taxied, a boy across the aisle pointed at Avery's backpack. "Mom, look! That eagle patch! It's like the one in that book about the fighter pilot." The mother, flustered, tugged him back toward his seat. "Don't stare, Liam." Bradley leaned forward with a grin. "Future aviation nerd, huh? Careful, he might end up joining the Air Force and sitting next to the wrong crowd." Avery's hand stilled on her tray table. She turned just enough to meet Bradley's gaze, not with anger, but with the kind of quiet steadiness that unsettles people used to controlling the room. Bradley blinked and turned back to his tablet. Avery looked out the window again. As the aircraft lifted into the sky, the chatter settled. Most passengers moved on, back to emails, playlists, and overpriced champagne. Candace walked past again, taking orders for pre-meal drinks. She skipped Avery's row a second time. Avery didn't bother raising her hand. Instead, her focus drifted, past the clouds, past the surface tension in the air. Something about this flight felt tight, controlled. And it wasn't just the behavior of the passengers. The crew moved with unusual rigidity. The purser, in particular, A tall man with a graying crew cut and pilot wings stitched over his chest kept glancing back toward the cabin every few minutes, his eyes scanning, stopping, scanning again. At one point, Avery turned just enough to meet his gaze mid-sweep. He froze. It was only half a second, less maybe. But in that moment his expression shifted, slightly. A flicker of recognition. A blink. Then he turned away too quickly, as if caught looking where he shouldn't. Avery didn't move, but her breath slowed. Because she knew that look. Not just familiarity, but protocol. The kind of look someone gives when they see something unexpected, but classified. The plane bumped slightly through a pocket of turbulence, and conversation resumed. Candace passed Avery again, this time offering drinks to her row, but pointedly skipping her cup. Avery shook her head with a faint, almost invisible smile. Savannah whispered something to Heather, who burst into soft laughter. Behind them, Troy Redford lowered his designer headphones and muttered to no one in particular. "She's not even annoyed. Probably used to being ignored." The laughter resumed in low, choked coughs and stage whispers, but Avery didn't hear it anymore, because she was thinking back to a runway in Kandahar. A night sky streaked with tracer rounds. A call sign shouted across a crackling radio. A man's voice, clearer than it had any right to be in that moment, saying, "She brought them home, every last one." Back then, they hadn't called her Avery. They'd called her something else. But no one here knew that. At least, they weren't supposed to. Until that look from the purser. Until that single, flickering moment of silent recognition. The clink of glasses and the rustle of newspapers filled the cabin. The plane had leveled off, cruising smoothly above the clouds. Avery kept her eyes on the horizon, her posture still as calm as it had been since boarding. Around her, the atmosphere had changed only slightly, still dismissive, still laced with the soft venom of those convinced of their own superiority. "Ma'am, are you sure you're in the right seat?" The question came from Heather Vance, seated directly in front of Avery. She turned around with the kind of tight smile that feigned concern but reeked of judgment. Avery didn't answer. She didn't have to. Candace, sensing an opportunity, walked past and paused just long enough to add, "Some people don't seem to understand how airline tiers work." She wasn't looking at anyone else. Another ripple of low laughter spread across the business cabin. Avery's fingers remained still on her tray table, her expression unreadable. It wasn't the first time she'd been doubted based on her appearance, her hoodie, her quiet. But few ever realized how intentional that quiet was. Savannah leaned over to Troy, gesturing not so subtly toward Avery. "You think she used airline points from a sweepstakes or something?" "Probably some PR campaign," Troy replied with a smirk. "Put a normal person up front so they can say they're inclusive." Savannah's phone was already open again, her screen lit by the glow of Instagram. "This is gonna be gold," she whispered. "Caption it, 'When economy sneaks into business.'" Across the aisle, a small voice broke the growing hum of Mockery. "Excuse me," the boy said, no older than 8, leaning toward Avery with hesitant curiosity. "You dropped this." In his hand was a luggage tag, tan and frayed at the edges, but intact. It had slipped from Avery's bag when she'd stowed it under the seat. Avery took it gently. "Thank you," she said, her voice low but sincere. Before she could tuck it away, the boy's eyes scanned the tag. "What's GS-27 Delta mean?" he asked, pointing to a line printed in faded black ink beneath the barcode. His mother, sitting beside him, flushed. "Liam, don't be nosy." But before she could pull him back, another voice cut in. One no one expected. "It's a military-grade routing code," the voice said quietly. Female, soft-spoken but sharp. The words came from a woman seated alone in the last row of business. Her presence had gone unnoticed until now. No designer clothes, no flashy accessories. Just dark slacks and a navy utility jacket. Her brown hair was pulled into a simple bun, and a plain staff badge hung loosely from a retractable cord at her waist. She wasn't a passenger. She was crew support, one of those behind-the-scenes tech specialists who occasionally flew along to service equipment or update systems mid-flight. The moment she spoke, Candace shot her a look. "I don't recall authorizing crew tech to speak with passengers," Candace said, her tone icy. The woman raised a brow. "I wasn't speaking to you." Then, calmly, she returned to her tablet. Liam was still staring at Avery's tag. "So, is it like a secret code?" His mother whispered something in his ear, urging him to sit back down. He did, reluctantly. Avery placed the tag back into her bag, zipping the front compartment with deliberate care. Across the aisle, Savannah chuckled. "Bet it's just a fake to impress the kid." Bradley, ever the cynic, added, "You can get those printed online. Hell, I had one made for my dog." Avery said nothing, but her hand, resting on her knee, flexed once. A silent tell for anyone who knew how to read combat body language. She wasn't angry. Not yet. But the pulse had shifted. Candace returned with meal trays. She handed Bradley his roasted chicken with practiced grace. Heather received her salmon fillet with a wine pairing. When she reached Avery's row, she paused. "Oh," she said flatly. "We're out of beef. Guess it's vegetarian for you." Avery looked up, her expression neutral. "Fine." Candace set the tray down a little harder than necessary, the cutlery clinking against the plate. Then she moved on. Savannah gave a mock gasp. "No steak for the guest of honor?" Troy followed with, "Budget cuts hit different up here." Laughter again. But this time, it wasn't unanimous. In the rear of the cabin, the tech crew member looked up once more. Her eyes flicked briefly from Avery to Candace to Savannah. Then quietly, she tapped something on her tablet, scrolling through an internal flight log. She paused, narrowed her eyes, then tapped again, this time on a secure access field labeled Command Level Log Review, Flagged Personnel. It required authorization. She hesitated, then entered her credentials. Access denied. She tried again, routing through a back-end access link she'd been taught during a Department of Defense upgrade exercise. A faint green light blinked once. Then a warning flashed. Restricted access. Tier 1 clearance required. Report detected inquiry. Her eyes widened. Back in 14F, Avery had finished her meal. She sipped water slowly, then turned slightly, just enough to glance toward the tech woman without drawing attention. Their eyes met for a heartbeat. No words, just recognition. The tech woman blinked first and looked away. From across the aisle, Heather leaned toward Bradley. "You'd think she'd be grateful for all the attention. Some people are so sensitive." Bradley laughed. "Probably thinks she's better than us." Avery leaned back in her seat. She wasn't better, but she was different. And the problem with people who rely on appearances is this: they always underestimate the ones who choose not to be seen. The smell of reheated chicken and burnt espresso lingered in the cabin. The chatter had mellowed to a self-satisfied murmur as trays were cleared. Candace made her rounds with the energy of someone performing, not serving. Each interaction a display, each gesture calculated. The business class passengers leaned into the ambiance, sipping wine and affirming their place atop the invisible hierarchy that governed these flights. But when she reached Avery's row, she stopped short. "I'm sorry," Candace said, her tone sweetened with artificial sympathy. "But it seems we're completely out of coffee." Avery looked up. "I didn't ask for any." "Oh," Candace blinked, then offered a polite shrug. "I just assumed. Some people need the caffeine to stay alert." A few chuckles rippled nearby, quiet but deliberate. Bradley Thorne sipped his espresso with the poise of a man who'd never heard the word no. He leaned back in his seat, loosening his tie with theatrical flair. "She doesn't need coffee. She looks like someone used to staying up all night waiting for fast food orders." Savannah giggled. "More like staying up arguing with customer service." Avery folded her arms, slow and methodical. Her expression didn't shift, but the silence around her gained weight. "Maybe she just wandered up here," Troy added, swirling his wine. "They do let anyone fly these days." Candace smirked, stepping back. "Let me know if you need anything. Ordinary." She walked off before a response could form. Heather Vance leaned slightly toward her seatmate. "At least she's quiet. Can you imagine if she made a scene? We'd never get off this plane." No one noticed that the crew tech from the previous chapter, now seated at the far end of business class, had subtly removed her ID badge and was typing quietly on her work tablet. In the cockpit, the air was noticeably tenser. Captain Emery Steele, the lead pilot, had just finished reviewing the next leg of their flight path when his co-pilot glanced toward the main display panel, frowning. "Message coming in, encrypted channel," he muttered. Steele leaned forward. "Encrypted? From where?" The co-pilot tapped a few keys. "Source, Joint Base Andrews, Priority 1. A small icon blinked at the corner of the panel. Steele swiped to open the message. It was short, simple. Flagged anomaly detected on manifest number 449 AC. Passenger presence not authorized in civilian travel manifest. Clearance level redacted. Subject may present historical conflict with chain of command. Discretion advised. Observation only. Do not engage." Steele's hand hovered over the screen, his expression unreadable. Then he tapped twice, and the message vanished into the encrypted log. He didn't speak for several seconds. The co-pilot glanced at him. "Sir?" Steele leaned back in his chair. "Cross-check passenger 14F, quietly." The co-pilot hesitated. "You think it's her?" "I don't know," Steele replied, voice low. "But I've seen that kind of warning once before, right before a major blackout op in Syria. The kind that doesn't go in any books." Back in the cabin, Candace paused at the galley, refreshing her lipstick in the metal reflection of the coffee machine. A notification blinked on the crew's master panel nearby. She glanced at it, frowned. "Message from cockpit," she muttered. She tapped to open it. The screen displayed a single instruction. "No further engagement with passenger 14F unless necessary. Discreet observation." Candace's brows furrowed. Her eyes flicked toward the cabin, toward Avery. "What is going on with her?" she whispered to herself. She tucked her tablet away and resumed service, but her gait had changed. No longer casual, now calculated. Meanwhile, Savannah scrolled through her phone, bored. "Ugh, no reception. I can't even post the video of her glaring at Candace." Troy shrugged. "Probably for the best. It'd look bad if you bullied someone and they turned out to be, I don't know, CIA." "Please," Savannah scoffed. "She's dressed like she got kicked out of the mall." Across the aisle, Liam whispered to his mom again. "She doesn't look mad." The mother shushed him, but her glance at Avery lingered a little longer this time. Less judgmental. More uncertain. In 14F, Avery reached into her backpack slowly. She pulled out a black notebook, its edges worn smooth by time. She opened to the middle, past old maps, scribbled formulas, and torn corner tabs, until she reached a page that had only 3 words scribbled in the margin. Night Widow. Silent return. She tapped the corner of the page twice with her index finger. Her eyes didn't leave the words. From the rear, the tech crew woman was watching. She leaned back slightly, activating a secure screen overlay on her tablet. The code she'd input earlier was still flagged, still flashing that same line. Tier 1 clearance required. Her eyes narrowed. Then she began typing again. This time she rerouted the query through a channel she'd learned during a one-time seminar with a DoD cyber analyst, something no tech staff was supposed to try mid-flight. The result came back in less than a second. Not an error, not an access denial, just a line of text in red. Subject redacted from system. Clearance, presidential override only. Her fingers froze above the screen. In 14F, Avery tucked the notebook away and turned toward the window. For the first time since boarding, her expression changed. Not anger, not discomfort, but readiness. Something had shifted in the air, and she could feel it. In the cockpit, Captain Steele stared ahead, hands gripping the yoke. "Whoever she is," he murmured, She's not someone you forget. Night, blacker than oil. The kind of darkness that doesn't just surround you, it swallows you whole. Avery crouched behind the shattered wing of a downed aircraft, her pulse thudding in her ears. Sand whipped across the tarmac like tiny razors, slicing through her exposed skin. The radio in her hand sputtered static. Explosions lit the sky in the distance, too close for comfort. "Night Widow, do you copy?" A voice crackled in. "Status report. Are you still alive?" She clicked once, a simple acknowledgement. Then she scanned her surroundings. 3 injured crew members lay behind her, breathing shallowly. One was barely conscious. 2 more had made it to the hangar, she hoped. That left 5 unaccounted for. She didn't flinch. Instead, she stood, holstered her sidearm, and began dragging the nearest man, Corporal Diaz, toward the shadows of the hangar. One arm slung over her shoulder, one breath at a time. The mission hadn't just gone sideways. It had disappeared from the books entirely. No one would talk about what happened here. No medals, no debriefs, just silence. And in that silence, she'd made a choice: save them all, or die trying. Avery's breath caught for a second as the memory pulled her under. But just as quickly, the cabin's gentle turbulence brought her back. The cabin lights dimmed to a soft, amber glow. The passengers, having long since finished their meals and complaints, had slipped into a strange quiet. Sleep masks, wine refills, a few whispered conversations. Avery blinked once, twice, then resumed scanning the cabin from behind her lashes. That's when she heard it. The voice wasn't loud, but it had the weight of accusation. Well, isn't this a surprise?" Avery turned slightly. A man in his late 50s stood in the aisle, his hair thinning but his posture still rigid, like a habit from years past. He wore a sports coat and slacks, but there was something unmistakably military about the way he carried himself. He was looking straight at her. "I thought they court-martialed you," he said. "But here you are, flying commercial. Must have run out of hiding places." Candace perked up nearby, sensing something delicious brewing. Savannah's ears all but twitched. Avery said nothing. The man stepped closer. "Lieutenant Colonel Mark Grissom, 3rd Recon, retired." He gestured vaguely at his chest. "Maybe you remember. You left us to rot in Raqqa." The name dropped like a grenade. Avery's jaw didn't move, but her fingers curled slightly around the edge of her armrest. Across the aisle, someone whispered, "Wait, what did he say?" Grissom didn't wait for confirmation. He looked around, addressing the cabin as if they were his new audience. "You know what they called her back then? Night Widow. Like she was some legend. Turns out, legends bleed like the rest of us." Candace's eyes lit up with the thrill of gossip elevated to scandal. "Is this true?" she asked, her voice falsely soft, as though she were a concerned friend. "You were in the military?" Avery's voice, when it came, was quiet. "Yes." "And you abandoned your post?" Heather Vance asked sharply. "That's what he said, right?" Grissom smirked. "She was pulled from the field mid-op, disappeared. The rest of us had to clean up the mess." A hush fell over the cabin. Even the ambient music seemed to quiet. Avery didn't respond. She didn't deny it, and that silence rippled louder than any outburst. Troy Redford raised his brows. "Is this some kind of undercover redemption arc, or just a PR tour gone wrong?" Savannah's phone was already up again. "Is this post-trauma tourism? Because that would be so on brand." Liam, the boy from earlier, looked confused. "What's a deserter?" His mother hushed him again, but she looked at Avery differently now. Not with judgment, but with something closer to fear. Candace leaned toward Grissom. "You're sure about this?" "I don't forget faces," he said. "Especially not ones that got good people killed." That did it. The whispers turned into murmurs. Glances shifted. The judgment wasn't subtle anymore. It was loud, invasive, and sharp. But Avery just sat there, still, grounded, until her eyes found the tech crew woman again. Still at the back, still quiet, but her eyes hadn't left Avery since Grissom had spoken. Her hands were clenched around her tablet. She wasn't smiling. In the cockpit, the co-pilot looked over at Steele. "Sir, passenger 14F, she's drawing attention." "I know," Steele said. His voice was tight. "You believe what the guy said? About desertion?" "I don't believe anything until I see the full file," Steele said. Then, after a pause, "But we're not getting that file, are we?" "No, sir." Back in the cabin, Grissom returned to his seat with theatrical pride, adjusting his blazer like he'd just testified before a courtroom. Savannah leaned into her camera phone and whispered, "You heard it here first. Our mystery passenger might be a traitor." Avery finally moved. She leaned forward slightly, unclipping her seatbelt. Slowly, she reached into the front pocket of her backpack and pulled out a single item, a patch, no larger than her palm, black and gray. An eagle mid-flight. Its edges were torn, scorched from something long past. She placed it on her tray table, then folded her hands. The whispering stopped, because even those unfamiliar with military insignia recognized that patch. And those who did, Candace included, went silent. Grissom's face paled slightly. Avery didn't speak. She didn't need to. The patch spoke louder than any defense. The tension was no longer subtle. It wrapped the cabin like an electrical charge. Silent, humming, ready to strike. Avery stared out the window as the city below crept closer. The announcement had just come through. "Brief refueling stop at Joint Base Andrews. Remain seated unless otherwise instructed." Simple, procedural, but the air was anything but normal. Candace moved quickly, lips pursed, eyes hard. She walked to the galley, tapped a command on the crew console, and activated the priority line. "This is Senior Attendant Morgan, Flight 449AC, requesting security detail at refueling stop. We have a passenger on board with suspected military desertion history. Potential security risk, row 14F. The words were cold, precise, too eager. Across the aisle, Savannah gasped dramatically. "Oh my God, this is actually happening." Troy laughed. "Do you think they'll cuff her in front of us? Like on TV?" Heather added, "It's what happens when people try to sneak into places they don't belong." Bradley sipped his wine. Smug. "You know, if this is some kind of loyalty program stunt, it's not working." Even Mark Grissom, who had seemed content with his earlier outburst, now leaned back with arms folded, satisfied with the storm he'd stirred. Avery remained still. She hadn't moved since laying the scorched eagle patch on her tray table. She hadn't spoken. She hadn't flinched. The only part of her that moved was her hand, tapping once, slowly, against the armrest. Steady, deliberate. From the back of the cabin, the tech crew woman hadn't taken her eyes off Avery. Her tablet now displayed a restricted screen she hadn't dared push further. But her instincts screamed that the woman in 14F was not what they thought. Not at all. The pilot's voice returned over the intercom, calm but tighter than before. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be landing briefly at Joint Base Andrews for scheduled refueling. This will be a secured perimeter stop. Please remain seated." Candace turned and walked slowly down the aisle, eyes locked on Avery as if bracing for a reaction. She stopped 2 rows away, pulled out her phone, and, with careful subtlety, began filming. Avery didn't acknowledge her. Instead, she leaned slightly, adjusting her tray table. The tray clicked. The tension snapped. Savannah's voice rose with excitement. "She's gonna run," Heather scoffed. "Where's she gonna go? She can't hide and coach." Even Liam, the boy across the aisle, seemed to feel the storm building. He tugged on his mother's sleeve. "Mom, I think they're being mean." His mom hushed him, but her hands fidgeted in her lap. And then it happened. The plane touched down. The wheels screeched softly on the runway. Outside the windows, uniformed airmen and vehicles waited, forming a modest but visible perimeter. The moment the brakes hissed to a stop, Candace made her move. She stepped into the center aisle, cleared her throat, and raised her voice just enough for everyone to hear. Per airline policy and military protocol, she began, we are required to cooperate with authorities in matters of national security. Passenger in 14F, please remain seated until escorted. Gasps rippled through the cabin. All eyes turned to Avery. Still, she didn't move. But then, just as Candace started to turn toward the cockpit, Liam's voice rang out. Loud, clear. Mom, look, that's her, from the book. Everyone turned toward him. Liam pointed directly at Avery. The lady with the black jet, she's in the book about fighter pilots. I remember, Night Widow. She's the one who flew through the sandstorm and saved the team. The cabin fell into stunned silence. Avery blinked once, then turned slowly toward the boy. He wasn't wrong. Savannah tried to laugh, but it caught in her throat. Kid, it's probably someone who looks like her. No, it's her, Liam insisted. She had that patch in the plane with the red stripes. Bradley leaned toward the window. Wait, didn't that story get turned into a documentary? Grissom's smirk faltered. Troy whispered, no way. That mission wasn't real. Was it? Candace's face had turned from confident to confused. Her hand hovered over her phone, thumb trembling. And then, the final twist of the moment landed. The cockpit door opened. Captain Steele stepped out. His presence changed the cabin. He didn't speak immediately. He just looked around, eyes settling first on Candace, then Grissom, then Liam, and then, finally, on Avery. He looked at her, not with curiosity or suspicion, but recognition. Real, sharp recognition. For a second, he stood frozen, like the name had clicked into place. Then he gave the smallest nod. The kind military men say for equals. Ms. Blake, he said, his voice calm, respectful. Would you mind stepping outside with me? The silence cracked like glass. Candace stepped forward. Captain, I already informed security. He raised one hand without looking at her. Stand down. But she's a risk. She's not, Steele interrupted. Trust me. Avery rose, smoothly, quietly. She lifted her backpack, slipped the patch back into her pocket, and followed Steele to the cabin door. Grissom stood halfway, as if to object, but Steele glanced at him once, and the older man sat back down, pale and silent. Liam watched her with wide eyes. Avery paused by his seat. You remember all that from a book? She asked, a small smile at the edge of her lips. He nodded. I do. You were brave. Avery tapped his tray gently. So were the people who wrote that book. They made sure no one forgot. She walked on. The door opened. Sunlight poured in, and just outside, lined up along the tarmac, stood a squadron of airmen in uniform. Waiting, not with weapons, but with salutes. The cabin buzzed with the quiet murmur of shaken egos and shifting glances. Avery had just stepped off the plane with Captain Steele, her hoodie flapping slightly as the sunlight from Joint Base Andrews spilled in through the open hatch. But inside, no one quite knew what to do. Troy whispered to Savannah, You saw that, right? The salute? They don't do that for just anyone. Savannah didn't answer. Her phone was already raised, camera focused on the doorway. She hit record, angling her phone slightly for a better shot. Candace, flustered but trying to maintain control, stood near the galley and cleared her throat. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, her voice tight. We're still under military protocol during this refueling. Please remain seated until further notice. That includes all VIP guests. It sounded official, but her confidence had cracked. She kept glancing toward the door, toward the place Avery had disappeared, and then to the captain's seat, now empty. In the far rear of business class, the tech crew woman sat upright, tablet in hand. Her badge had been clipped to her waistband again, half covered by her jacket. She glanced down, rechecking her access trail. The last query she had run, after bypassing multiple internal firewalls, had returned only one thing. Subject status, restricted, Tier 1 clearance required. It hadn't said who Avery was, but it had screamed loud enough. You are not cleared to know. And for someone who had quietly spent years assisting with classified avionics updates and working under layers of anonymity, that response chilled her more than anything. Because she knew what Tier 1 meant. It didn't just block access, it erased history. Meanwhile, in row 12, Heather leaned across the aisle to Bradley. She's probably part of some propaganda initiative. I mean, why else would a military base let her walk out like that? Bradley was less confident now. That patch she had, you think it was real? I've seen replicas on Etsy, Savannah chimed in, not taking her eyes off her phone screen. Watch. If I zoom in here, we can probably find a manufacturer tag or something. She pinched the screen, trying to zoom in on the paused video of Avery walking down the aisle. The shot was a little shaky, but clear enough. There, on the lower back panel of the backpack, was the eagle patch. Her fingers adjusted the angle, zeroing in. Then the screen went black. She frowned. What the? Tried again. Playback error. Then a notification popped up. Unauthorized content. This recording has been disabled due to national security protocols. Reference code ND0991. Troy peered over her shoulder. What did you do? I didn't do anything, Savannah whispered harshly. It just disappeared. The file's gone. A soft beep came from her phone. The screen now showed a brief message before fading to black. Footage flagged and removed by executive override. Across the aisle, Heather's brows lifted. Executive, as in presidential? Savannah slowly lowered her phone. For the first time since the flight began, her face was pale. Liam, still sitting beside his mother, tapped gently on the tray in front of him. Mom, are we in trouble? His mother shook her head, though her face betrayed her uncertainty. No, sweetheart. Just stay seated. From her row, the tech crew woman adjusted the brightness on her tablet and opened a secure channel. Her screen now showed a separate query chain, one she hadn't activated in years. Command back channel. Foxtrot level access required, she typed. Query. Identity confirmation for passenger manifest position 14F, Avery Blake. Confirm or deny Tier 1 designation. The screen blinked once, then again, then returned. Identity status. Confirmed. Tier 1 designate. Assigned call sign. Night Widow. Operational status. Dormant. Active clearance, valid. Her breath caught. Dormant meant inactive, not retired. Valid meant still trusted at the highest levels. She stared at the screen. This wasn't some disgraced pilot. This was someone who had been intentionally removed from public records to protect the system that couldn't control her. Behind her, murmurs continued to build. Bradley tapped his fingers against his armrest. Do you think she was part of that mission they classified last year? The one with the jet that went dark over the Gulf? No way, Troy replied. That was a black op. No survivors. Heather added, maybe she wasn't supposed to survive, but she did. Liam whispered again. She looked sad when she walked out, like she knew people didn't believe her. His mother, finally catching on, gave a tight nod. Sometimes the best ones are the quiet ones, baby. At the galley, Candace stood frozen, her tablet buzzing with alerts she didn't understand. Each notification read the same. Restrict communications. Passenger 14F subject to executive protocol. Do not interfere. Her face drained of color. She turned toward Savannah. Delete your video, now. Savannah blinked. Too late. It's already gone. The phone... She held it up helplessly. It's blank. Candace stumbled backward slightly. Across the cabin, the tech woman stood slowly, still holding her tablet. She wasn't going to interfere, not yet. But she needed to know more, needed to speak with the captain, and maybe, if protocol allowed, with Avery herself. Because if what she'd just seen was real, then the woman everyone mocked wasn't just someone with a past. She was someone who never should have been here at all. Someone whose presence on a commercial flight meant only one thing. A message was being sent, and no one, not even the system, could stop it now. The door to the jetway remained open longer than usual. Military personnel outside moved with quiet purpose, maintaining a respectful distance from the aircraft. No weapons were raised, no commands barked, just waiting. Inside the cabin, passengers whispered, stared, or sat frozen in place. Every moment that passed stretched the silence tighter. It was the kind of silence that came not from discomfort, but from awe and something else. Realization. Avery had not returned. Not yet, but the weight she'd left behind filled every seat. Then, boots. Sharp, heavy, deliberate. Colonel Dean Halstead stepped aboard. His uniform was immaculate, decorated chest, crisp lines, white gloves in one hand, cap under his arm. The air changed the moment he crossed the threshold, like someone had opened a sealed chamber of authority. No one mistook him for a passenger. He didn't look left or right. He didn't need to. He walked halfway down the business class aisle, then stopped, and turned, the cabin still as stone. Colonel Halstead scanned the passengers slowly, his gaze steady, unhurried. Then, in a voice forged by decades of command, he spoke. "Where is Night Widow?" Silence. The question didn't need clarification. There was no doubt who he meant. Several passengers instinctively turned toward 14F, now empty. Liam, the boy, sat upright. "That's her name," he whispered. "Told you." Savannah's phone lay useless in her lap. Her hands had stopped recording minutes ago. Troy's smirk had vanished. Bradley Thorne adjusted his collar. Even Candace couldn't summon a word. Colonel Halstead continued. "I served with Night Widow. I flew under her in situations no one talks about. She carried squadrons through battles the public doesn't even know happened. And she did it without recognition, without politics, and without hesitation." He paused. "Some of you may think you know who she is, or what she did." He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice, but making it all the more powerful. "You don't." A murmur swept the back of the cabin. Grissom, the man who had accused her earlier, visibly paled. He shrank back into his seat. Halstead straightened again. "Passenger 14F, he said firmly, "is not a threat. She is not a problem. She is not a rumor." He put his cap back on. "She is the reason many of us are alive." Then, another sound. From the rear galley, a rustle. Someone stood. Quietly, slowly. It was a man in a dark suit. Nondescript. No name badge. Nothing flashy. Until now, no one had noticed him. He had blended in among the crowd, never speaking, never reacting. But now, as he stepped into the aisle, everyone noticed. He walked calmly toward Colonel Halstead and stopped, then turned to face the cabin. "My name is Brigadier General Elias Monroe." Gasps. Not from recognition, but from the rank, because that name did mean something. To those who followed military scandals, to anyone who'd read the deep dive reports about high-level mission failures, redacted orders, classified reshuffles. He glanced at Halstead, then back to the passengers. "I was on this flight under a no-disclosure designation, traveling without title, observing." His eyes settled on Candace, then Savannah, then Bradley, then Grissom. "You all made it very clear what you thought of the woman in 14F. You judged her, mocked her, filmed her, laughed." He paused. "Allow me to correct the record." Savannah sunk lower in her seat. Bradley turned away. Elias Monroe took a breath. 15 years ago, I authorized Operation Tetherfall, a recon mission in northern Syria. Deep territory, unstable conditions, poor intel. Avery Blake, call sign Night Widow, was tasked with support and extraction. The mission failed, not because of her, because of my orders. Orders that cost lives. No one breathed. I gave the call to pull her team. Mid-extraction, I signed the order that stranded her and 9 others. I filed the report that blamed the weather, not the leadership. I signed off on the documents that scrubbed her name from record." He swallowed. "And she still brought them home." Liam's mouth dropped open. Candace looked like she might faint. "I buried her career," Monroe said softly. "Not out of malice, but out of fear. Fear of what it would mean if the public knew a junior officer had outflown the failure of a general." Avery still hadn't returned, but her absence filled the air. "She could have exposed me," Monroe continued, "but she didn't. She disappeared, silently. No medals, no press, just gone." He looked down. "And now, here, on this plane, I witnessed what I hoped I never would, that the same woman we failed, we still judge." A long beat passed. Then Monroe looked directly at Liam. "You were right, son. She was in that book. She's in a lot of books, just the kind that don't sit on shelves." Liam smiled faintly, proud. Colonel Halstead stepped forward once more. "When she returns," he said, "I expect everyone here to treat her not as a mystery, but with the reverence reserved for those who walked through hell and came back anyway." No one said a word. And then, like a signal, the sound of boots approached the doorway. Avery Blake stepped into view. Her hoodie caught the light, her backpack slung over one shoulder, calm, composed. Monroe turned. Their eyes met. He didn't speak, just offered a solemn nod. Avery returned it. No anger, no bitterness, just quiet acknowledgement, because the name they'd forgotten had never forgotten them. The sun hit the tarmac like a searchlight, bright and unwavering. Heat shimmered off the concrete, but the air carried a tension cooler than it should have been, a reverence that hushed the wind itself. Avery Blake stepped down the stair car without ceremony, her boots hitting the ground with the certainty of someone who had done this 1,000 times, just never under these circumstances. She didn't look around. She didn't adjust her hoodie. She didn't need to, because they were already waiting for her. 12 F-22 pilots stood in formation, their posture military precise, their expressions unreadable. Beside them, the jets shimmered under the sun, engines silent, but presence deafening. The nose of the lead fighter bore the faint ghost of a painted emblem, scratched and faded, but still visible. A downward swooping eagle, wings tucked, talons drawn. The symbol of Night Widow. As Avery stepped forward, the first pilot called out, "Squadron, attention!" In one unified motion, every pilot snapped to attention and raised a salute. Avery didn't return it immediately. She simply stood there, letting the moment stretch, letting the silence fall over everything. No words, no dramatic music, just the sound of respect, louder than any cheer. Behind her, passengers craned their necks at the windows, faces pressed to glass, jaws slack. Troy's mouth hung open. Savannah reached for her dead phone again, forgetting for the third time that it no longer worked. Bradley simply stared, unable to form a sentence. Candace sat down in the jump seat, trembling. Inside, Colonel Halstead remained by the hatch, watching with folded arms, his face unreadable but his chest rising with something close to pride. Then, one of the younger pilots stepped out of formation. He couldn't have been more than 28, sharp jaw, storm gray flight suit, his helmet tucked under his arm. He approached Avery, then halted 2 steps away. "Ma'am," he said firmly. "Lieutenant Anders, Strike Team Echo. You trained me. Camp Raven Rock, 6 years ago." Avery met his gaze. He wasn't asking her to remember. He knew she did. "You taught me stall recovery with 1 engine and 30 seconds of air. You made us fly blind, use instinct, trust formation." She nodded once. "You said anyone can fly in calm skies, but only the silent ones survive storms." Avery's lips curled into the faintest smile. "I said that? You said it while you were chewing a guy out for blacking out mid-roll." That earned a quiet chuckle from another pilot in formation. The spell, briefly, bent into warmth. But then Lieutenant Anders's face shifted, became somber. "We thought you were dead," he said. When the reshuffle happened, when they erased your name from our files, we thought maybe—" "I know," Avery interrupted gently. "You weren't wrong to think that." Anders swallowed. "They told us you disobeyed orders, that you broke rank, that you endangered the chain of command." Avery tilted her head slightly. "And now?" Anders didn't hesitate. "Now I know they were scared of you." The pilots behind him didn't flinch. He continued, voice growing steadier. "They were scared because you trained a generation of flyers to question, to think, to lead. And when the leadership got dirty, when the audit started and the power shifted, they couldn't control you." The words floated in the dry air like smoke from an old fire, finally finding air. "So they buried you," Anders said. "But they didn't realize you trained us." Avery blinked slowly. A shadow passed over her face. Not sadness, recognition of how deep it had gone, of how long it had been held back. Halstead finally descended the stairs behind her and stood to her right. "Ma'am," he said formally, though with clear conviction, "I have authority from the Joint Command Council to reinstate your title and clearance, effective immediately." He pulled a sealed envelope from his chest pocket and handed it to her. Inside, the familiar weight of a badge slid against her palm. Call sign, Night Widow, rank, Colonel, 06, security level, Tier 1, unrestricted operational status. Avery stared at it for a moment. The system that once buried her was now, publicly, bringing her back. And the message was unmistakable. They could no longer silence what she stood for. Lieutenant Anders stepped forward again. "One more thing, ma'am," he said, his voice quieter now. He reached into his chest pocket and pulled out a folded cloth square, carefully wrapped. He handed it to her. She unfolded it. A small metal pin gleamed under the sun, a flight insignia, worn but polished. "Our squadron flies under your original motto," he said. "No one forgotten, no one silenced." Avery closed her hand around it. Behind her, Monroe, still inside the plane, watched silently from the forward cabin. His face showed no bitterness, only gravity. Candace didn't dare look out the window again. The passengers were no longer whispering. They weren't judging. They weren't filming. They were watching, some ashamed, some in awe. Avery turned back toward the jet for a moment, as if deciding whether to reboard. She didn't. Instead, she faced her pilots, tucked the pin into her hoodie's breast pocket, and finally returned the salute. It was sharp, precise, absolute, and it said more than any speech ever could. Retribution had arrived, and it wore no anger, just truth and silence. It started with a whisper. A blurry phone video, filmed through the cabin window, captured Avery Blake stepping onto the tarmac, her figure framed by saluting F-22 pilots. It wasn't Savannah's video. Hers had been scrubbed clean by military protocols. This came from another passenger in coach, a quiet woman who hadn't spoken once during the flight, who had simply watched, recorded, and posted with one caption. She didn't say a word, and the world bowed. Night Widow had respect earned. The video hit social media 5 minutes after takeoff resumed. By the time the aircraft cleared Virginia airspace, it had already reached 2 million views. 15 minutes later, it was at 6 million. By the time Avery stepped back into the aircraft, helmet in hand, rank restored, silence intact, the internet had already begun its reckoning. "Wait, is that our flight?" Savannah gasped, scrolling through her notifications. Her face lost all its signature color as she turned her screen to Troy. "Oh my God, I'm in the background, I'm in the video!" Troy leaned in. "No way!" The frame was unmistakable. Savannah's smug face, frozen mid-laugh. Behind her, Heather, whispering something with raised eyebrows. Candace walking past Avery's row without offering service. All captured, all shared. The comment section exploded. "That woman in the hoodie is a legend. These passengers? Every one of them deserves to be named. Let's find out who they are. The silent ones? They're the ones who save us. Within minutes, names were unearthed. Savannah Knox, influencer with a skincare brand built on empowerment. Within an hour, 3 sponsors had issued public statements cutting ties. Troy Redford, startup CEO of an inclusive tech platform. His investors were tagged on Twitter. By the end of the flight, his board had initiated emergency talks. Heather Vance, senior partner at a high-profile law firm known for ethics-first litigation. Someone on Reddit found a speech she gave about workplace respect and played it side by side with her smirking in the viral video. Bradley Thorne's LinkedIn profile lit up like a fireworks show. Connections questioned, employers received messages. And then someone found a podcast interview where he'd bragged about knowing how to sniff out weakness in a room. The line hit differently now. And Candace? Her name was trending globally. Hatch Candace Morgan, flight attendantville, salute. Her not you. She sat stiffly in the jump seat, eyes glued to her own phone, watching the comments flood in. You're the face of why people don't trust those in charge anymore. She stayed silent. You got loud, and you lost. A message from her supervisor appeared on the screen. Candace Morgan, suspended pending review. Immediate termination under consideration. Do not report for duty. Her hand trembled as she lowered the phone. Bradley muttered, "This is out of control. It was just a misunderstanding." "No," said a voice. Everyone turned. It was Heather. She looked shaken, not by the backlash, but by something else. Something deeper. I know who she is." Troy raised a brow. "We all know now. She's Night Widow." "No," Heather said slowly. "I mean, I've seen her, years ago, in court." A few people leaned closer. "I was a junior attorney on the Parenson case," she said, eyes unfocused. "Massive federal litigation. Our team was sure we had it in the bag." Bradley scoffed. "And? We lost. We couldn't figure out how. Our entire argument collapsed mid-trial. The opposing side had this strategy. It was surgical, like they knew every move we were going to make. We never saw the strategist, just the lead attorney." She paused. "But afterward, I heard a name." She looked directly at Avery now, who sat back in 14F, quiet as ever, the badge tucked discreetly into her hoodie. "They said her name was Blake. Avery Blake, former military, shadow strategist, operated under sealed consultation." Avery didn't blink. Heather exhaled. "I laughed when I saw you on this flight. Thought you were out of place. But now I realize you've been in the room the whole time. Just not where we expected." Avery's gaze didn't waver. Heather sank into her seat. "We didn't beat you. You let us think we won." Avery said nothing. She didn't need to. The flight continued in strained silence. From the coach cabin came a voice, an older woman, speaking just loud enough for those near the front to hear. "She didn't shout. She didn't threaten. She didn't need to." Someone murmured in reply, "Because power doesn't yell." By the time the plane began its descent into D.C., the mood had shifted entirely. There were no more smirks, no more whispers, just the kind of stillness reserved for moments when people realize they've stood next to history and mocked it. As the wheels touched the runway, a final notification pinged across Troy's phone. DOJ to review military erasure protocol after viral incident involving Night Widow. He looked at Savannah. "You think she's going to speak publicly?" Savannah shook her head. "She doesn't have to. The world's already listening." From the corner of her eye, Avery watched the city skyline blur past the window. She hadn't planned on being known again, but the system that silenced her had just made her louder than ever, and she hadn't spoken a word. The room was smaller than Avery expected. It wasn't the grand marble hall of televised hearings, not the soundbite theater the public often saw in news clips. This chamber, buried deep in the Capitol's secure wing, was utilitarian. Low ceiling, dark wood, 5 senators behind a long curved desk. Cameras were banned. The transcripts would be sealed. Avery sat alone at the table across from them. No lawyer, no uniform, no notes. Just her and a glass of water, untouched. The senator in the center, a lean man with silver hair and a voice like gravel, leaned forward. "Colonel Blake," he began. "Or would you prefer—" "Avery is fine," she said evenly. He nodded. "Avery, you've declined reinstatement into the armed forces, despite unanimous clearance and full executive support." "I have," she replied. Another senator, a woman from the ethics subcommittee, frowned. "You're walking away from the rank, the pension, the power. After everything you've endured. Why?" Avery's gaze didn't waver. "Because what happened to me wasn't about my rank. It was about the system's fear of people who don't obey blindly." The room shifted slightly. Avery continued, calm but firm. "I was erased because I asked the wrong questions, because I deviated from orders that would have cost lives, because I called out corruption within my own command structure, and when I was right, they buried me anyway." The gravel-voiced senator cleared his throat. "You were reinstated with full honors. Your name restored." "That's not enough," she said. He raised a brow. "What more do you want?" She didn't blink. "I want you to stop pretending this was a one-time mistake." Silence. The air grew heavier. Avery leaned forward slightly, her voice quiet but razor-sharp. "There are others. Officers, analysts, strategists. Good people who got pushed out because they challenged incompetence, because they flagged corruption, because they saw things they weren't supposed to and refused to play along." She took a breath. "I'm not asking to be celebrated. I'm asking that the system stop punishing people for having integrity." The ethics senator interjected. "You're asking us to rewrite whistleblower policy at the military command level. I'm asking you to acknowledge that those policies aren't protecting anyone. They're paper shields. People disappear, not because they break the rules, but because they shine a light on the people who do." The gravel-voiced senator tapped his pen once. "So if we were to offer you your command back, your original post, your team—" She shook her head. "I'm not coming back." That silenced them again. "I don't need a seat to speak truth," she said. "What I need is for the seat itself to mean something again." The youngest senator, quiet until now, finally spoke. "What would it take? To begin a correction? To ensure this doesn't happen again?" Avery reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded document. She slid it across the table. "3 things," she said. 1. Establish a non-military oversight body for internal erasure claims. 2. Make Tier 1 clearance revocations auditable by the Senate Intelligence Committee. And 3. Classify erasure retaliation as a federal crime. The senators exchanged glances. The ethics senator read over the top of the paper. "This would trigger review of nearly 200 past cases." "It should," Avery replied. "Start with the names no one remembers. You'll find heroes in the margins." The gravel-voiced senator exhaled slowly. "You understand what this would do to the chain of command?" "I do," she said. "And you're willing to burn the system down to fix it?" She looked him in the eye. "No, I'm asking you to rebuild it, from the inside." There was something unshakable in her voice. Not anger, not defiance, but conviction. Pure, focused, and steady. They didn't argue. They didn't threaten. They simply sat with it, because they knew the truth. Avery Blake wasn't a threat to national security. She was a threat to national complacency. Back on the steps of the Capitol, reporters waited. The story had leaked. Not the content of the hearing, but the fact that it had occurred. The sight of Avery exiting the secure wing was enough. Cameras snapped. Microphones extended. "Colonel Blake, did you accept your reinstatement?" She walked past them. "Are you suing the Department of Defense?" She didn't flinch. "Is it true you once refused a presidential order?" At that she stopped, turned, faced the press directly. "I never refused to protect my country," she said calmly. "I refused to protect cowards." Then she walked on. That evening, the news exploded. Anonymous sources confirmed that Avery Blake had declined reinstatement and instead handed the Senate a list of reform demands. Social media turned the moment into legend. She didn't take the chair, she flipped the table. The system tried to bury her. She came back with a blueprint. One tweet went viral within minutes. She spoke in silence for years, then in 1 hour, made the whole system stutter. Within 24 hours, the Subcommittee on Military Oversight issued a statement of intent, a full internal review of erasure-based disciplinary actions. The press release included one phrase never before seen in military governance documents, referred by Night Widow Protocol. And just like that, what had started as mockery on a flight became a legislative movement. Not because Avery shouted, but because when the system tried to hide her, she came back and made it look in the mirror. The signature was quick, almost too quick for something that would change the course of military protocol forever. At precisely 0900 hours, in a quiet conference room buried inside the Pentagon's southeast wing, representatives from the U.S. Air Force and the Department of Defense signed off on a document titled Blake Directive 01, Establishment of Internal Oversight Committee for Clearance-Based Erasure and Whistleblower Retaliation Cases. The name was no accident. Blake Directive. Not Night Widow, not Colonel, just Avery Blake. Civilian, witness, survivor, reformer. The table where the papers were signed was surrounded not by journalists or generals, but by analysts, techs, auditors, and legal specialists. These were not the people who made headlines. These were the people who made change last. Avery sat at the back of the room, not at the table, not flanked by security or press, just present, observing, calm. When the final document was passed to her, she didn't hesitate. She signed with a steady hand. No cameras flashed, no applause sounded. Just a quiet nod from the Air Force liaison and a brief handshake from a DoD secretary who said nothing more than, "Thank you for not walking away." She smiled faintly, then turned to leave. But someone was waiting near the door. The tech crew woman. The one from the flight. She wore civilian clothes now, casual, clean, but her posture held purpose. In her hand, a plain manila envelope, creased at the corners. Avery stopped. Their eyes met. "I owe you something," the tech woman said quietly. "You don't," Avery replied, ever calm. "I do," the woman insisted. "And I think you should know why." She handed over the envelope. Avery opened it slowly. Inside, copies of access logs, query records, and a detailed timestamp trail, a digital fingerprint of how her file had been reactivated, legitimately, quietly, from inside the system. Avery raised her eyes. "This was you," the woman nodded. "I didn't override anything," she said. "I didn't hack or leak. I just looked carefully and found what had been buried." Avery studied her more closely now. Not the uniform, not the badge, those were gone. But the face. There was something familiar. Not in the woman herself, but in the way she held her composure. A quiet precision. "What's your name?" Avery asked. The woman hesitated, then straightened. "Ellie Carter, Civilian Systems Specialist, Joint Forces Avionics Division." Avery tilted her head. "Carter," Ellie nodded. "My father was Captain Nolan Carter. You flew with him, Operation Daggerfire. He didn't make it home." Avery blinked once. "I remember," she said softly. "He refused to eject until the medevac cleared. Held altitude with one engine and a half-burned wing." Ellie's voice caught. "He talked about you in every letter he sent. Called you the reason I'll make it home." She paused. "When he didn't, we still got the patch. Yours, folded inside his flight journal. And I knew one day I'd work where you did. And when I saw your name flash red in our system, I knew it was you." Avery swallowed. "I didn't know he had a daughter." "I was 7 when he died," Ellie said. "But I've spent the last 15 years chasing his shadow, and I finally found the person he trusted most." She looked down for a moment, then back up. "I didn't do this for recognition. I did it because people like you aren't supposed to vanish. Not while I'm watching." Avery stepped forward and placed a hand lightly on Ellie's shoulder. "You watched," she said quietly. "And that changed everything." Ellie smiled. "I just lit the fuse. You were the explosion." They didn't hug. They didn't cry. But the weight of that moment, the bridge between generations, between betrayal and redemption, settled deep. Later that week, the Blake directive was made public. A single-page press release. No fanfare, no press conference. But one sentence stood out. Named for Avery Blake, whose silence proved more powerful than any command. The story spread again. But this time, it wasn't outrage. It wasn't scandal. It was reverence. Profiles ran across every major outlet. The pilot they tried to erase. The whisper that restructured the Air Force. Night Widow's last mission. Reform. But Avery didn't appear on television. She didn't tweet, didn't post. She simply returned to a life she'd built in the margins, volunteering at veteran outreach programs, mentoring young cadets behind closed doors, giving no speeches. Yet everywhere she went, the patch was recognized. Not because she wore it, but because others started to. New recruits, civilian techs, quiet fighters who saw what one person's silence could do. And Ellie? She was promoted 6 months later. Her first act as technical director. Mandate a passive flagging system for all high-level clearance revocations. One that couldn't be disabled without a 3-person review team. She called it the Carter Rule for her father. And every month, she sent Avery a single update. Just a number. Number of attempted erasures prevented. 7, 12, 19. And on the day she wrote 34, she added a note. One of them reminds me of you. She doesn't speak much either, but she doesn't need to. Avery smiled. Legacy wasn't about monuments. It was about continuity, and hers had just begun. The wheels touched down at Reagan National Airport with a soft hiss. Passengers stirred from their silence like people waking from a long, dream-heavy sleep. Seatbelts clicked open. Bags rustled overhead. And the usual scramble to deplane began. Only this time, no one moved quickly. They watched her. Avery Blake stood slowly, her hoodie drawn up again, helmet cradled in one arm. The eagle patch now fully visible on her backpack. The same patch that had once been dismissed as fake, a costume piece. Now it glinted like a metal no one dared to question. She didn't speak, didn't smile. She nodded once to the crew, those who had stayed quiet, who hadn't participated in the mockery. Then she turned and walked up the aisle. Her steps were quiet, deliberate, and somehow, each one echoed louder than the engines outside. Passengers parted for her, unconsciously. A path opened in silence. Heather Vance, the once condescending attorney, didn't try to meet Avery's eyes. She simply looked down at her hand, folded neatly in her lap. Troy Redford, slouched low, clutched his phone as if he could hide behind the black screen. Savannah Knox didn't even raise her phone. For once, there was nothing she could post to salvage herself. Bradley Thorne, the man who once joked about fast food and bus stations, reached out as if to say something. Maybe an apology, maybe an excuse. Avery didn't look at him. She didn't need to. She was already gone. Outside the terminal, the world continued. DC was alive as always. Blinking traffic, swarming taxis, men in suits checking emails as they walked. But inside the airport, a strange stillness followed Avery. The kind people feel when they've seen something they don't fully understand. People whispered, "That's her, right? From the flight? She's the one in the video." No, she's more than that. She's the one they tried to erase. Avery passed through the terminal without stopping. No one blocked her path. She walked through automated doors and into the morning sun. And there, by the curb, stood Marshal Blake. Simple navy suit, clean cut, no entourage, just presence. He said nothing as Avery approached, just opened the car door. She slid in, setting the helmet gently beside her. He paused before closing it. "They're still watching, you know," he said. Avery looked out the window at the crowd still gathered near the exit. "Let them." The door closed, and the car pulled away, but not everyone had moved on. Near the family arrivals section, a little girl with pigtails tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Mom, it's her, the pilot lady." Her mother, startled, looked up from her phone. Her eyes widened. The girl ran forward, clutching a notebook and a pen. Her pink backpack bounced behind her. Avery noticed the motion just as the girl stopped in front of her car, breathless. "Excuse me," she said shyly. "You're the one from the sky, right? From the video?" Avery stepped out before the car had fully stopped. The girl offered the notebook. "Can I get your name, please?" Avery crouched, taking the notebook with care. She opened to a blank page, wrote, "Avery Blake," then paused, and underneath, in clean, steady print, added, "To those who rise when forgotten." She handed it back. The girl beamed. "Thank you." Behind her, her mother whispered, "Thank you for everything." Avery nodded, stood, and turned back to the car. But the sky interrupted her. A low rumble rolled across the clouds. Subtle, almost mistaken for traffic, until it became undeniable. Two streaks of motion split the sky above. Silver shadows moving in perfect sync. F-22s, flying in formation just overhead. No announcement, no show, just a silent salute. Avery looked up. The jets tilted slightly in a coordinated bank, wings glinting in the sun. Then they climbed, disappearing into blue. Marshall stepped out of the car, watching with her. "They followed you here." Avery didn't answer, but her fingers brushed the patch on her backpack just once. The final moment had no applause, no medals, just the hum of flight, and the knowledge that for the first time in a long time, she had not been erased. She had been seen. 1 week later, the mural appeared on the side of a veterans clinic in Baltimore. It wasn't massive. Just Avery, standing beneath the silhouette of a fighter jet. Hoodie on, hands at her sides. And above her head, painted in bold, hand-drawn strokes. "The quiet ones don't need noise. They need space to rise." Below it, a new patch began circulating among cadets, technicians, even civilians. An eagle, mid-flight. Not as a decoration, but as a reminder. That silence is not surrender, and being forgotten does not mean being gone.